Hello, let's talk about the scriptures. My name is Cali Black here with Big Picture Monday, giving you all the context you need to totally rock this week's Come Follow Me readings. This week we are studying Matthew chapters 15 through 17 and Mark chapters 7 through 9. And these chapters actually parallel each other very well, very well. So as you're going through and you're reading them, whichever one you read first, when you read the second account, be prepared to just read the same stories over. It's kind of nice to kind of dive into these stories. Now, at this point, Jesus is clearly expecting his disciples to have faith in him and to maybe even understand who he really is. It's also clear his disciples are falling short of that expectation a lot. There's a lot of doubt. There's a lot of second guessing. There's a lot of things going on that's making it really difficult for them to believe. And yet, he corrects them each time in a loving way and shows them that he expects them to do a little bit better. And so I just encourage you to kind of look for that theme as you read the stories this week. And I just can't not think of the parallels to our own experiences. If you are part of God's covenant, what high expectations we sometimes have, right? Like there's some big expectations that we are expected to fill. And yet we know we're going to fall short of that all the time. And yet Jesus is there, not giving excuses, right? Like he's still teaching the high expectations and he's pointing us right in the direction that we need to go, but he's also helping us get there. He knows we need help. He knows we're not going to be able to reach that every time. And I just love seeing this example with his apostles where they're constantly falling short. For some of us, we're like, how could you not understand this was the Messiah and what that all meant, right? And yet here we are making covenants and then going out and being casual and not keeping all the covenants that we've made, right? We see the example of how God and Jesus treat the people who fall short of the high expectations that he has for them. It's always correction, but it's always done with love as well. All right, I'm excited to talk about the stories this week. I want to clear up a couple things that might be confusing. First thing is that you're going to see Jesus feeding a crowd with loaves and fishes. And you might think, haven't we read this like 5 times already? Not 5 times, but 4 times, right? We get a different account. You'll notice it talks about Jesus feeding a crowd of 4,000. And this time there's 7 loaves and a few fishes. So this is a separate event than the more talked about event of feeding the 5,000 that we talked about a couple weeks ago. So this is something that is totally different, even though it sounds like a very similar miracle occurred. Now, the second thing I want to clear up is we get to talk about the Mount of Transfiguration this week. The Mount of Transfiguration. Let's talk about it. I want to empower you to feel really confident as you talk and teach about this topic and study it to the best of your abilities. First of all, I love looking at, as we're studying the New Testament this year, what the rest of Christianity has to say about certain topics. And when you go to look at Mount of Transfiguration, there is not that much. A lot of other people in Christianity, it's just like, well, Jesus went up to a mountain, there's some angels, like it seems cool, whatever. But I think with our theology and understanding priesthood keys and priesthood power and authority and transfigured beings, like all this stuff, I think there's a little greater focus in our religion where it's like, I think there were some really important things that happened on the Mount of Transfiguration, and that's what we call it. That's not actually a name of a mountain. We don't know what mountain it is. We just call it the Mount of Transfiguration because that's where Jesus's transfiguration occurred. We don't know where this is. There's not an actual location that we're familiar with. But we are going to read about 2 different accounts in Matthew and Mark about Peter, James, and John accompanying Jesus onto a mountain. When they are on the mountain, they're going to see Jesus in his full transfigured glory. They see glimpses of Jesus in his full glory. Amazing. They're also going to receive some priesthood power. And then they're also going to see Moses and Elias. Now, I want to help you out here. Let's break down who is Elias. We've talked about this a little bit before, but I want to make it super clear today, because even in the chapters you read today, you might be like, wait, never mind. I thought I knew what was going on, and now I don't know what's going on with Elias, okay? There's 3 people who are Elias, but let me explain it in a way that I think is going to make sense. So the most important thing is Elias is the Greek name. Remember, the New Testament was originally written in Greek. So a lot of the names that we have, like Jesus, is Jesus's Greek name, and Peter is his Greek name. And when it talks about Jonas, that's the Greek name, right? So same thing. Elias is just the Greek name for the Old Testament prophet Elijah. We learned about him all last year, right? We know Elijah. And so this is Elias, aka Elijah. Same exact name, just in a different language. So when they go onto the mountain, they see Moses and they see Elias, aka the Old Testament prophet Elijah. Okay? End of story. That's it. Okay? Now, something else you might want to know is that Elias is also a title, meaning someone who comes before or someone who prepares the way. So, I mean, you could argue that Elijah, whose name is Elias, was also an Elias, like he prepared the way for the sealing keys and everything. But when they come down off of the mountain, Peter, James, and John and Jesus come down off the Mount of Transfiguration, you're going to see Peter, James, and John ask some questions to Jesus about who's the Elias who's preparing the way for the Messiah. Now, this time they're using Elias in terms of the person who prepares the way, right? And it's going to be clear from what Jesus responds that he's going to talk about who prepared the way for Jesus? John the Baptist. So John the Baptist is an Elias. Sometimes, though, that becomes John the Baptist is Elias. Okay, that's both correct. It's not that his name is Elias, it's just that he has the title of being Elias, meaning he prepared the way for Jesus. Now, as you read the Joseph Smith translation for the 2 chapters that cover the Mount of Transfiguration, though, you're also going to see Jesus talking about himself being Elias. That Jesus has come to prepare the way for all of us. All right? So all of these ways are going to be used in your reading this week. We have Elias, literally Elijah. We have John the Baptist being an Elias, and we have Jesus Christ teaching that he is an Elias as well. So for John the Baptist and Jesus, think of it as the symbolic title. For Elijah, that's just his name. Literally just his name, although maybe you could apply the title to it as well, I guess. But for the most part, that's just his name. Now, the only other confusing part is that in the Joseph Smith translation in Mark, it's also going to sound like Jesus is saying that John the Baptist, Elias, was also on the Mount of Transfiguration. And so looking through the best doctrinal resources that we have, it seems that most people assume that John the Baptist was on the Mount of Transfiguration as well. That account just didn't make it everywhere. So it sounds like on the Mount was Moses and Elijah, Elias, and also John the Baptist, Elias, was present as well. Okay. Hopefully that makes sense and you feel empowered to go forward with the information. Now, as for what exactly happened on the Mount, all that we have is what's in the scriptures. So we can see that they conversed with angels, they saw Jesus's transfigured power, they received priesthood power themselves. A lot of modern gospel scholars in the LDS faith make the parallel that this sounds like maybe an endowment of power, receiving priesthood keys, something like that. Mountains were representative of temples, so there's a lot of parallels we could make there. But as for what actually happened, I know we want to just know all the details and exactly what happened. We don't necessarily have that. We study the scriptures, we do what's best within there. But then if it inspires us to go to the temple and be reminded of our own endowment of power, I think that's a great thing to do as well. Okay, Hopefully that makes sense. Let's talk a little bit about the specific scriptures we'll be studying. Let's start in the book of Matthew. Matthew, we have 3 chapters, 15, 16, and 17. So let's start in chapter 15. We start with the scribes and the Pharisees criticizing Jesus for not doing this ritual washing, the cultural washing, before he started to eat. And Jesus starts teaching them about, oh, you hypocrites, what matters, what comes out of our mouth is much more important than what goes in. There are certain things that matter, and they're not focused on what actually matters. He even uses the phrase, it's like the blind leading the blind, with the scribes and the Pharisees. We then have an account of Jesus healing a Canaanite, meaning Gentile, meaning non-Jew, non-Jewish woman's daughter. Pretty cool faith-promoting experience. Jesus did not interact with very many at all non-Jews, aka Gentiles, and here he is interacting with this Gentile woman and healing her daughter, which is pretty cool. He heals a lot more. We get the account of Jesus feeding the 4,000. Chapter 16, Jesus starts rebuking the Pharisees who are constantly seeking after signs, and he warns his apostles, don't listen to the Pharisees, don't listen to their doctrine. And then we get this cool experience. You'll definitely recognize these verses of Peter testifying that Jesus is the Son of God, Peter bearing that testimony, and Jesus promises Peter the sealing power, the keys of the sealing power, and says he has great things in store for him. I love that. Jesus also prophesies that he will die, and he invites his apostles to take up their cross and follow him. And then Matthew 17. So the last chapters in both of these readings are the Mount of Transfiguration chapters. So we get Peter, James, and John going up to the Mount of Transfiguration with Jesus. They come back down. They learn that John the Baptist was also an Elias. And then we continue on with a few more stories. Jesus heals, it's called the lunatic son of a man. That's how the story is referred to. And he prophesies of his own death as well. All right, in Mark, it's very, very similar stories. So starting in Mark chapter 7, we have Jesus eating and not performing that ritual washing beforehand, and the Pharisees criticizing him, and he teaches them about hypocrisy and how they're caring about the wrong things. They're caring a lot about the wrong things. He heals the daughter of the Greek woman as well, and then heals another man. In Mark chapter 8, he feeds the 4,000. We get him rebuking the Pharisees for seeking after signs. See how these are all just very parallel? And he then, to teach his apostles, he says, beware of the leaven or the doctrine of the Pharisees. So he's explicitly warning his apostles, don't listen to what the Pharisees are teaching. It's dangerous. It really is. He heals a blind man, and then we get Peter testifying about who Jesus is. Love that testimony from Peter. And then finally in Mark chapter 9, we get the Mount of Transfiguration. Make sure to read all the Joseph Smith translations, by the way, especially for the Mount of Transfiguration chapters. Jesus heals the son of the man, referred to as the lunatic son. And he says that he could heal this man's son because he had prayed and fasted for power beforehand. He's teaching his apostles how he was able to heal, and he teaches his apostles how they will know who is the greatest among them, and condemns anyone who offends little children. All right, that's it for the content for this week. I think my personal focus question is, so I briefly touched over this man who has a son, and this son is referred to as the lunatic son. And Jesus, we get 2 accounts of it, but the account in Mark chapter 9 where Jesus heals this man's son. This is when the man responds, and I'm sure you've heard this before, and he says, Lord, I believe, help thou mine unbelief. And I love that. That's what I'm going to think about this week. Those moments when I want to believe, but I understand that I don't. And sometimes I'm tempted to turn to other sources, and not even like bad sources. I just want to talk to other people about it. What's your opinion? What has someone else said? Sometimes I even just want to turn into myself and be like, what do I think? I want to reason my way through this problem. And yet there's so much power that comes in being vulnerable and saying, I can't help my unbelief, or I'm not going to try to help my unbelief. I'm going to give it to God. I'm going to let him help my unbelief in whatever area that may be. What a vulnerable but also empowering moment to give it all away, to not have to be the one who fixes everything, even when it's elements of our testimony. Jesus can help with that as well. Okay, have a great week this week and happy studying.